The numbers don't shout. They don't trend on social media. They don't argue back in press conferences. They just sit there, quietly exposing things no one wants to say out loud. And right now, those numbers are telling a story the WNBA would probably prefer stayed buried beneath headlines about growth, momentum, and a historic season. Because while league officials celebrate milestones, something far more unsettling has been happening behind the scenes. The money hasn't disappeared, it's moved, and in many cases, it didn't move toward the league at all. What's happening right now isn't just a boost in popularity or a hot rookie moment. It's a shift in power, a real one. Sponsors, advertisers, and major brands aren't quietly spreading their bets across teams, rivalries, or the league's collective identity. According to widespread industry chatter, they're doing the opposite. They're narrowing their focus. They're simplifying the equation. And that equation keeps circling back to one name, Caitlin Clark. This isn't about a slightly better endorsement deal or a few extra commercials. Reports suggest brands have begun redirecting serious money away from league-centered campaigns and into Clark-focused strategies, not as a compliment to her talent, but as a calculated decision. A decision rooted in engagement data, conversion rates, merchandise velocity, and audience behavior. The kind of numbers that make executives stop caring about tradition and start caring about results. And those results are allegedly painting a picture that makes the league look less like the main event and more like the background. What makes this uncomfortable is how quickly it happened. Leagues usually control the spotlight. They build stars, package narratives, and make individual players part of something bigger. But here, the gravity feels reversed. The conversation has quietly shifted from how do we grow women's basketball to how do we align with Caitlin Clark's audience. That difference may sound subtle, but it represents a complete realignment in who holds leverage. When brands think that way, they're no longer buying into a league, they're buying around it. And before this gets misunderstood, this isn't about blaming Clark. By most accounts, she didn't ask for this imbalance. She didn't design the spreadsheets or sit in the boardrooms where these decisions were made. She just showed up, played the way she always has, and brought with her an audience that refuses to look away. An audience that clicks, buys, shares, and shows up. That's the part sponsors can't ignore, and once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. Here's where the story gets even more awkward. While official league narratives push unity and collective growth, the underlying data reportedly tells a different story, one where a rookie's personal brand generates reactions that entire league campaigns struggle to replicate. When one presence consistently outperforms the platform she plays on, it forces a question no organization likes answering. What exactly are we selling? Because if fans are tuning in for her first and the league second, that flips the entire business model on its head. Leagues are supposed to elevate players. Players aren't supposed to expose the league's weaknesses by accident. Yet that's exactly what many observers believe is happening right now. Not through scandal, not through controversy, but through numbers that don't care about feelings, legacy, or optics. This is the part no press release prepares you for. Growth on paper doesn't always mean control in reality. And if the league no longer owns the attention, if it's simply borrowing it from one individual, then the celebration may be happening a little too early. Because attention is power, and power, once it shifts, rarely moves back quietly. And the deeper you look into where the money is really going, the more it feels like this story isn't about success at all. It's about dependence. And what happens next might explain why so many people inside the sport suddenly seem nervous, even during what's supposed to be a golden moment. The shift didn't happen with an announcement. There was no press release, no bold headline, no warning shot. It happened quietly, in meetings most fans will never see, where brand executives stared at screens full of charts instead of highlight reels. According to marketing insiders, the central question in those rooms wasn't how do we reach WNBA fans anymore. It became something far more specific. How do we reach Caitlin Clark's audience? That subtle change in wording is everything, because when the language changes, the strategy follows. This is what a financial pivot looks like in real time. Sponsors aren't abandoning the WNBA outright. That would draw too much attention. Instead, reports suggest they're restructuring how money flows within the ecosystem. League-wide activations get tighter budgets, player-specific campaigns get expanded ones, and the centerpiece of those campaigns keep becoming harder to ignore, not because the league asked for it, but because the performance metrics made the decision feel inevitable. What brands care about most isn't passion or tradition, it's behavior, clicks, purchases, retention. And data circulating through the marketing world allegedly shows that when Clark is involved, consumer behavior changes dramatically. Engagement spikes, follow-through improves, and products move faster. Compared to generic league messaging, content featuring her reportedly converts at a different level entirely. That kind of consistency makes accountants nervous in one way and excited in another. Nervous about reliance, excited about efficiency.
Once that realization sets in, the money stops being emotional. It becomes surgical. Instead of broad sponsorships designed to lift the league as a whole, brands begin carving out campaigns that orbit one personality. They're no longer buying association, they're buying attention. And attention, as far as the data suggests, is clustering around Clark in a way women's professional basketball has never seen before. Industry analysts have pointed out that this mirrors influencer economics more than traditional sports marketing. In that world, platforms matter less than personalities. The audience follows the person, not the institution. If that comparison feels uncomfortable, that's because it should. Leagues are built on the idea that no one player is bigger than the system. But when sponsors start structuring deals based on individual reach instead of collective value, the system starts bending whether it wants to or not. This is where the pivot becomes impossible to hide. Brands don't ask the league how to activate anymore. They come in with conditions, access requests, usage guarantees. According to reports, some negotiations have included quiet insistence on featuring Clark prominently as part of any broader partnership. Not officially, not on paper, just enough to make the expectation clear. That's not collaboration, that's leverage. And the league can feel it. When revenue conversations begin with one name instead of the logo, control starts slipping. Not dramatically, not overnight, but inch by inch. The danger isn't that sponsors prefer Clark. The danger is that they've started designing strategies where the league itself is optional, a vessel rather than the destination. The most revealing part of this shift isn't what brands are doing loudly, it's what they've stopped doing quietly. League-centric storytelling has reportedly slowed. Campaigns that once highlighted rivalries, teams, and season arcs are being replaced by narratives that feel more personal, more intimate, and more singular. The message to consumers becomes simple: follow her journey and the rest will fill in around it. But that assumption carries risk, because when the audience bonds with one figure more than the structure surrounding her, the balance of power changes, and the WNBA now finds itself in a position it never planned for, adapting to a market where the money moves first and explanations come later. And what started as a quiet adjustment is beginning to feel like something much bigger, because once sponsors commit to a pivot like this, there's no easy way back. And the next phase of this story shows just how early the warning signs really appeared. What makes this entire situation even more unsettling for the league is that none of it began on a WNBA court. The power shift didn't wait for opening night, and it didn't care about rookie growing pains or professional adjustments. Long before Caitlin Clark ever played a single minute in the WNBA, the numbers were already working against the league's traditional model. During her final stretch in college, Clark-driven content was reportedly outperforming entire professional campaigns in reach and engagement. Social clips featuring her routinely pulled more interaction than league playoff promotions. Television segments centered on her were drawing casual viewers who didn't normally watch women's basketball at any level. And that's the detail that made marketing departments sit up straight. This wasn't just an existing fan base getting louder. This was new attention entering the ecosystem entirely, drawn in by one player rather than the structure around her. Brands didn't interpret that as hype, they treated it as proof of concept. According to reports from within the sponsorship space, companies began running side-by-side comparisons months before the draft. College footage featuring Clark versus league-branded assets, her appearances versus standard league messaging, and the trend was consistent. When she was the focal point, audiences lingered longer, clicked faster, and shared more frequently. That kind of behavior doesn't need a professional resume to justify investment. It needs momentum. So, when draft night arrived, something unusual happened. Sponsors didn't wait. They didn't pause to see how she'd adjust to the speed, physicality, or schedule of the pro game. Major deals were reportedly locked in before she ever suited up, based entirely on projected influence rather than proven professional output. That alone should raise eyebrows. In most leagues, endorsement value follows performance. Here, performance followed endorsement pressure.
This early confidence didn't come from optimism. It came from data tied to what insiders had started calling the Iowa effect. During her college run, viewership for women's basketball surged in ways that hadn't been seen before. Merchandise tied to her name moved at rates usually reserved for established professional stars. Arenas filled with fans wearing her number, recreating her logo-range shots, and showing up not just for the game, but for her presence. To marketers, that behavior wasn't casual admiration. It was loyalty forming in real time. What stood out most to brand strategists wasn't just how many people watched, it was who was watching. Younger audiences, first-time viewers, fans who didn't identify as women's basketball followers at all. Clark was pulling people in from outside the usual pipeline, and that kind of expansion is priceless in marketing. It signaled that her appeal wasn't confined to the existing fan base the league had struggled to grow for years. She was creating her own lane. By the time she was drafted, the financial groundwork had already been laid. Her arrival into the league wasn't treated like the beginning of a journey. It was treated like a continuation of one already in motion. And that's where the imbalance quietly formed. She didn't enter the league to be built up by its machine. She arrived with a machine of her own, complete with an audience sponsors already trusted more than the league's past performance. This is the part the WNBA never anticipated. Rookies usually need the league's platform to become marketable, but Clark inverted that relationship. She brought a platform with her, one that brands had already tested, measured, and decided to prioritize. That inversion changed everything, because from that moment forward, the league wasn't introducing Caitlin Clark to the world. It was being introduced to her audience. And once that line was crossed, there was no resetting expectations. The financial momentum was already rolling, the audience was already attached, and the next stage of this story shows what happens when that kind of momentum collides with professional reality and starts bending it. There's a moment in every power shift where neutrality quietly disappears. No announcements, no ultimatums, just decisions that make the direction unmistakable. For women's basketball, that moment arrived when major brands stopped experimenting and started committing. This was no longer about testing the waters or adding Caitlin Clark to existing campaigns. According to widespread industry buzz, companies began reorganizing their entire approach around her. And whether intentionally or not, that meant choosing a side. Take Nike, for example. This wasn't just another endorsement signing. Nike didn't plug Clark into a preset template. They rebuilt the template itself. Women's basketball storytelling shifted from league-driven narratives to something far more personal. Her journey, her range, her confidence, her identity. Campaigns that once balanced team imagery and league symbolism began orbiting around one figure, with the league fading into the background. The subtext was impossible to miss. This is the story people respond to most. And that strategy didn't happen in a vacuum. Nike is famously data-obsessed, and insiders claim internal testing made the decision almost unavoidable. When Clark-centered content ran independently, it outperformed broader league messaging by a wide margin. Engagement wasn't just higher, it was cleaner. Fewer impressions wasted, more direct interaction, more emotional buy-in.
From a business standpoint, tying women's basketball growth to one recognizable face suddenly looked like the safest bet. That same logic appears to have guided Gatorade. Instead of inserting Clark into a generic athlete rotation, the company reportedly built campaigns that mirrored her personality and training image. Bottles, visuals, messaging, all tailored to her aesthetic and work ethic. According to retailer chatter, some of those products moved faster than expected, with demand reportedly outpacing supply in multiple regions. That kind of response doesn't encourage caution, it encourages doubling down. But perhaps the most revealing move came from Wilson, the official basketball supplier of the WNBA. When a league's own equipment partner starts seeing more traction from a single signature product than from its broader women's line, it sends shockwaves through the system. Reports suggest Clark-branded balls weren't just popular, they were dominant. Meanwhile, similar campaigns featuring other elite players, run with comparable budgets and distribution, generated solid but unremarkable results. The contrast wasn't subtle, it was glaring. That's when this stopped being about hype and started looking like hierarchy. Brands weren't publicly dismissing the league, but their actions spoke clearly. Resources flowed where returns were strongest, visibility followed performance, and suddenly, Clark wasn't just part of women's basketball marketing, she was anchoring it.
What makes this uncomfortable is that none of these companies acted recklessly. From their perspective, they were being responsible. They followed the numbers. They watched how audiences behaved. They responded accordingly. But the cumulative effect of those decisions began creating an unintended consequence. The league's value proposition started shrinking in comparison to the player operating within it. This is how brands pick sides without ever saying it out loud. They don't frame it as abandonment. They call it optimization. But when optimization repeatedly centers on one individual, the ecosystem starts tilting. The league becomes a conduit, a setting, not the star of the show. And once brands commit to that structure, reversing course becomes nearly impossible, because now expectations are set. Shareholders notice, sales teams adjust. Future negotiations start from a different baseline. The question is no longer whether Caitlin Clark can move product. That's already been answered. The real question is what happens to the league when the market has quietly decided it doesn't need the full package anymore. And that realization set the stage for a reaction the WNBA couldn't avoid, even if it wanted to. By the time the WNBA fully realized what was happening, the momentum was no longer something they could steer, it was something they had to respond to. And that distinction matters, because leadership sets direction, reaction tries to survive it. What followed looked less like a strategic pivot and more like a scramble to stay aligned with forces already moving too fast to slow down. Almost overnight, the league's marketing presence began to shift. Promotional materials that once emphasized balance, rivalries, and parity started centering more heavily around Caitlin Clark. Broadcast teases lingered on her, social clips followed her routines. League-run content treated her arrival as the heartbeat of the season, even though she was a rookie on a team that wasn't expected to dominate the standings. That wasn't favoritism, it was pressure, external pressure. Sponsors weren't subtle about what they wanted. According to industry reports, brands increasingly signaled that their investments performed better when Clark was front and center. And when money talks, leagues listen. The WNBA didn't suddenly decide she was more important than its established stars. It adjusted because the market made the alternative financially uncomfortable. The troubling part is what that adjustment implies. Every time the league leans harder into Clark, it reinforces the belief that she's the primary draw. That might help short-term metrics, but it chips away at something far more important, the idea that the league itself is the attraction. The more the WNBA highlights her as the focal point, the more it confirms sponsor suspicions that without her, the league struggles to command the same attention. This creates a dangerous feedback loop.
Sponsors invest heavily in Clark. Those campaigns outperform expectations. The league amplifies her even more to protect engagement and revenue. Sponsors then point to the results and double down again. With each cycle, the gap widens, and suddenly the ecosystem starts revolving around one individual rather than a collective product. What gets lost in this shift are the players who helped build the league's credibility long before this moment. Established stars with championships, MVPs, and global resumes find themselves increasingly pushed to the margins of the league's public narrative, not because their impact faded, but because the economic incentives changed. Attention follows money, and money is following one storyline. Behind the scenes, this isn't being celebrated. Reports suggest league officials are privately uncomfortable with how quickly this dependency has formed. The questions they're asking aren't about growth anymore, they're about risk. What happens if the center of gravity moves? What happens if the player holding that gravity becomes unavailable, uninterested, or overwhelmed? The league's current posture doesn't offer many answers. And that's what makes this phase so revealing. The WNBA didn't engineer Caitlin Clark's dominance within its marketing, it adapted to it, which means control is already compromised. When a league begins shaping itself around external demand rather than internal identity, it stops leading the narrative and starts chasing it. The irony is that every move made to stabilize the moment may be deepening the long-term problem, because the more the league reacts, the clearer it becomes that it isn't driving this era, it's trying to keep up with it. And the consequences of that realization only get heavier once you start asking what happens if the system has built itself around something that can't be guaranteed.
This is the part of the conversation that almost never makes it into public statements or optimistic interviews. It happens quietly, late, and behind closed doors, when the spreadsheets stop looking exciting and start looking fragile. Because once the WNBA began reacting instead of leading, a new question emerged, not about growth, but about exposure. And it's a question no league ever wants to face. What happens if the entire ecosystem is leaning on something it can't control? Right now, an uncomfortable amount of financial momentum appears tied to Caitlin Clark being present, visible, and available. Ticket sales reportedly spike when she's confirmed to play. Broadcast interest rises when she's scheduled to appear. Merchandising numbers, sponsor activations, and media coverage all tilt sharply based on her participation. That kind of concentration might look like success on the surface, but structurally it's a gamble. In professional sports, availability is never guaranteed. Fatigue happens, injuries happen, burnout happens. And when they do, leagues usually absorb the shock because the brand itself remains the anchor. But when attention, revenue, and outside investment begin clustering around one individual, the safety net thins. According to people familiar with league-side discussions, executives have quietly started asking scenarios they never anticipated having to plan for this early. Not hypotheticals for decades down the line, but questions that feel suddenly relevant. What if she needs time away? What if physical wear becomes an issue? What if the weight of expectation becomes too much and she pulls back from the non-stop spotlight? No one is predicting those outcomes, but the fact that contingency planning is even being whispered about speaks volumes. Leagues aren't built to hinge on a single name, especially one still adjusting to the professional grind. There's another risk that rarely gets mentioned publicly: choice. If an individual athlete holds more commercial leverage than the league that employs her, options multiply. Overseas opportunities, alternative ventures, media-driven paths that don't require weekly league appearances. None of these are accusations, they're realities of modern athlete empowerment. And when a player reaches that level of independence early, the traditional power balance quietly erodes. From the league's perspective, this creates an unprecedented tension. They need Clark to thrive, but they also need her engaged, aligned, and present. That's a delicate relationship to manage when the leverage isn't clearly one-sided. It shifts conversations from partnership to appeasement, from structure to negotiation, and that's not how leagues are designed to operate.
The most unsettling part is that there's no clean solution. You can't deliberately shrink a star without damaging momentum. You can't diversify attention overnight without sacrificing short-term revenue. And you can't pretend the risk doesn't exist when the numbers keep reinforcing the dependency. It's a pressure cooker built not from failure, but from success concentrated too narrowly. And even if everything goes perfectly, no setbacks, no absences, no surprises, the risk doesn't disappear. Because reliance, once established, becomes expectation. Sponsors plan around it, media schedules around it, fans organize their attention around it. That kind of alignment leaves very little room for deviation. This is why some inside the league are reportedly uneasy despite the public optimism. They're watching growth that comes with strings attached, growth that feels less like expansion and more like balance, balanced precariously on circumstances the league doesn't fully control. And once you recognize that kind of fragility, the story stops being about one player's rise. It becomes a question about whether the system itself was ever strong enough to handle someone rising this fast in the first place. To understand why this situation feels so destabilizing, you have to contrast it with how power works in the NBA. The NBA has produced global superstars for decades, icons whose names alone can sell out arenas and move billions in merchandise, and yet the league itself has never felt smaller because of them. That's not an accident, it's architecture. Take players like LeBron James or Stephen Curry. Their individual brands are massive, but they exist inside a system that remains the primary attraction. Fans don't tune in just to watch LeBron play basketball. They tune in for rivalries, playoff races, championships, legacies, and history. The league is the stage, not the backdrop. Stars amplify it, but they don't replace it. The NBA invested decades in making the league itself indispensable. Team identities matter, conferences matter, seeding matters. Even when a superstar is injured or resting, the product doesn't collapse because the audience isn't anchored to one storyline. The NBA can survive transitions, retirements, and controversies because fans are emotionally invested in the structure as much as the players. That's where the gap becomes obvious. The WNBA never reached that level of institutional dominance. Its growth has relied heavily on individual moments, breakout stars, and cultural spikes, rather than a deeply ingrained league identity. So when someone like Caitlin Clark arrives with unprecedented momentum, the system doesn't absorb her impact, it bends around it.
In the NBA, sponsors want access to the league because the league guarantees eyeballs regardless of which star is on the floor. In the WNBA, recent sponsor behavior suggests confidence isn't evenly distributed that way. Brands appear more comfortable betting on Clark's draw than on the league's ability to generate the same response without her. That distinction is everything. One model distributes risk, the other concentrates it. Another critical difference is narrative control. The NBA dictates the conversation. Its stars participate in that conversation, but they don't define it alone. In contrast, current media coverage around women's basketball often feels like it's orbiting Clark rather than being anchored by league storylines. When that happens, the league stops framing the moment and starts reacting to it. None of this means the NBA is immune to superstar dependency. It means it learned how to survive it. The WNBA hasn't had the luxury of time, scale, or historical leverage to build the same insulation. So when a singular figure captures disproportionate attention, the imbalance becomes structural, not temporary. And that's the real reason this comparison matters. The issue isn't that Caitlin Clark is bigger than most players. The issue is that she's becoming bigger than the platform itself, in a way the NBA long ago engineered against. The men's league prepared for transcendent stars. The women's league is encountering one before it finished preparing its foundation. Which raises an even harder question. If the WNBA never fully solved this problem before, can it do so now, when the spotlight is brighter, the money is louder, and the expectations are higher than ever? From the outside, this looks like a dream scenario.
A breakout star, packed arenas, young fans copying moves on driveways and playgrounds, headlines finally paying attention. By every surface-level measure, what Caitlin Clark represents feels like the moment women's basketball has been waiting for. But when you slow the story down, the celebration starts to blur into something far more complicated, because the same signs that point to cultural breakthrough also raise alarms about structural fragility. Media coverage tells the story in ways numbers can't hide. Entire segments now revolve around Clark's presence rather than the competition itself. Pre-game discussions linger on her routines, while other matchups pass with minimal analysis. Social feeds lock onto her expressions, her reactions, her fashion choices, her aura. This isn't just sports interest anymore, it's celebrity attention. And while that brings visibility, it also shifts the center of gravity away from the game as a shared product. The fan behavior mirrors that shift. Attendance data reportedly shows massive spikes when Clark is scheduled to play, both at home and on the road. Teams that typically struggled to fill seats see sudden sellouts tied directly to her appearance. Secondary ticket markets surge when she's confirmed and soften dramatically when she's not. The message is unmistakable. Many fans are showing up for her first and the league second. That's not inherently bad. Every sport has gateway stars. The risk is what happens if the gateway becomes the destination. When interest doesn't broaden beyond the individual, the long-term foundation stays narrow. New fans may enter the ecosystem through Clark, but there's no guarantee they'll stay once the spotlight moves. Cultural moments are powerful, but they're also fragile. They depend on timing, emotion, and momentum. Structures are supposed to outlast all three. Young athletes feel this tension more than anyone. Youth participation and visibility have risen alongside Clark's popularity, which should be celebrated. Girls wear her gear, study her game, ask coaches to teach them her shots. That inspiration is real and meaningful. But the question quietly forming beneath the surface is whether they're falling in love with the sport itself or with the person symbolizing it. Those two paths don't always lead to the same outcome. Inside the WNBA, this dynamic creates a narrative dilemma. Building a sustainable fan base usually means selling competition, rivalries, championships, and team identities. But when coverage and engagement center overwhelmingly around one figure, those elements struggle to gain equal footing. The sport becomes a storyline rather than a system, and systems, not storylines, are what survive generational change.
Players are noticing this too. Reports and fan discussions suggest some veterans feel overshadowed despite elite performance and long-established careers. Their achievements don't suddenly matter less, but market attention doesn't follow merit evenly anymore. It follows momentum. That imbalance can quietly reshape locker rooms, marketing opportunities, and long-term incentives in ways leagues rarely anticipate until tensions surface. So this moment sits at a crossroads. It can be remembered as the catalyst that finally lifted women's professional basketball into the mainstream, or as the point where the league learned too late how dependent it had become on a single narrative. The difference between those outcomes won't be decided by headlines or hype. It will be decided by whether attention spreads or concentrates, whether curiosity evolves into commitment, and whether the league can convert fascination with one star into belief in the whole product. And that's why this moment feels so pivotal, because cultural breakthroughs are fleeting if they aren't anchored by structure, and structural weaknesses don't usually announce themselves until the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. By now, the pattern is hard to deny. This wasn't a loud takeover or a hostile shift. It happened quietly, through budgets, audience behavior, and decisions made far from the cameras. Power didn't get taken, it drifted. And in the process, it appears to have landed more firmly with Caitlin Clark than with the institution she plays for. Sponsors didn't make speeches about it. They voted with their dollars. And those votes told a story the WNBA can't afford to ignore.
This isn't an indictment of Caitlin Clark. By nearly every measure, she's doing exactly what transcendent athletes do, drawing attention, inspiring fans, and delivering results. If anything, her rise exposes a truth that's been building for years. The league never fully succeeded in making itself the primary attraction. It relied on moments, individuals, and flashes of momentum instead of constructing a brand identity strong enough to stand on its own. Clark didn't cause that weakness, she revealed it. That's why this moment feels so consequential. The league now stands at a fork in the road, with no easy path forward. One option is to continue riding the wave, maximizing short-term growth by centering everything around its most magnetic star. That approach brings money, attention, and relevance right now, but it deepens dependence and risk with every step. The other option is slower, more painful, and far less glamorous, rebuilding the league's identity so that stars enhance the product instead of holding it together. That likely means accepting fewer dollars in the present for a chance at stability in the future. Neither path is comfortable. Both carry consequences, and there's no guarantee the league can successfully pull off the second option once expectations, sponsors, and audiences have adjusted to the first. Power, once redistributed, rarely snaps back into place. It reshapes everything around it. What's certain is that the landscape has already changed. The relationship between player and platform is no longer what it used to be. The old assumption that leagues always hold the leverage doesn't fully apply here anymore. And whether the WNBA emerges stronger from this moment or more fragile will depend on decisions being made right now, largely out of public view. Because this story was never just about basketball. It's about who controls attention in the modern era, who converts it into value, and what happens when a system realizes, a little too late, that its brightest star may be shining independently of the structure built around her. The next chapter won't be written in highlights or press releases. It will be written in negotiations, strategy meetings, and choices that reveal whether the league can evolve or whether it's already been reshaped by forces it no longer commands.